go whenever you like.
It is 7 o'clock. Meeting is called to order.
Okay. All right, I'll take the roll. Committee Member Bierce.
Here.
Member Fasoon. Here. Member Hodges is absent. Member Larson.
Here.
Member Lieberman.
Here.
Member Melgen.
Here.
And Chair Vahil McClanahan.
Here.
Okay.
I'm going to read the land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lishan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home.
Are there any questions related to the minutes?
Is there any public comment on the minutes?
I'm not seeing any hands.
Move that we accept the minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Member Bierce.
Yes.
Member Fasoon. Yes. Member Larson.
Yes.
Member Lieberman.
Yes.
Member Melgen.
Yes.
Chair Vahil McClanahan.
Yes. All right, we're going to item 3, which is public comment. Anything not on the agenda?
Yeah, you can announce it. Can you see? Sorry, one moment.
Nick Peterson, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for taking my comments. I actually have comments from Lucinda Young and myself, so I'm requesting I get 6 minutes. I'll tell you when Lucinda's are done. I'm going to read them now. She provided for us. She is actually unable to speak right now, so I would like to convey these, and then I have a few I would like to make on my own. So Lucinda says, like many in Albany Climate Action Coalition, and in our community, I'm deeply concerned about the change in federal government that will occur next year, in particular about the expected termination of climate progress at the federal level, including withdrawal from the Paris Agreement regulatory process made under the Biden administration, and likely rescission of the climate provisions in the landmark Inflation Reduction Act. I heard Governor Newsom speak last week and was encouraged that our state leaders are working hard to Trump-proof our climate policies and are gearing up for litigation to protect those policies. I want to emphasize that to you that it's more important than ever to our cities to address the climate emergency with urgency. For the skeptics who say that what cities do on climate doesn't matter, I want to point out that C40 is a global network of cities all over the world committed to cutting their emissions by 1/2 by 2030. And those cities make up almost 25% of the global economy. Thank you again for getting a climate emergency declaration passed by City Council earlier this year. I think there's a need to outreach to city staff about the declaration and to get staff fully on board. In talking with some staff, I was surprised that some had not heard of the Council's climate emergency declaration. I was even more concerned to hear a fairly high-level staff comment recently that the increase in the number and intensity of extreme weather events like hurricanes were just naturally occurring events similar to in the past. This view directly conflicts with climate emergency declaration. If staff's disagreement with the declaration impacts actions and decisions staff is making for the city, that's a problem as it is a barrier to critical climate action. So I would ask that outreach and education be provided to staff and that they be made aware of the findings of the declaration, in particular the provision that says the city will set policy and assign resources through the lens of climate action, coordinating across departments and functions to ensure an effective, timely transition off fossil fuels to keep with our climate action and adaptation plan. So that's Lucinda Young's comments. And if possible, we could reset the clock. I have a couple comments I'd like to make. So I'll just start.
I'm seeing from the chair that that's okay. And we don't have any other hands raised, so I think we do have time.
Yeah. So again, I'd like to reinforce what Lucinda's just said about the change at the federal level is going to be really a negative impact worldwide on humanity's approach to the urgent need to address climate change. And to sit back and rely on federal funding, federal attention to this critical issue is not going to be possible for the next 4 years. So it is just critical that we at the state and local level work as hard as we can to increase and improve on the actions that we have put forward. So I have some ideas I'd like to share as priorities. First, I think the CAC should address the City Council to update only one aspect of the current cap, and that is net zero emissions by 2045 is 10 years too late. It is way behind where we need to be, according to the latest IPCC climate report. Scientists are very surprised at how rapidly temperatures are changing. So we need to, in as much as possible, step up our efforts. And we can't wait all year to propose one policy change to the City Council and have it happen. So we need to get a lot more going on. I suggest that the other item is that the city really does need a full-time dedicated climate action manager to coordinate, promote climate action across all city activities and purchases. Also to establish a timeline for the CAP with key milestones other than just these blank dates of 70% by this date and 100% by that date. Those are too far down the road politically and ineffective in motivating anybody. And we need to have much more clarity on what kind of path we need to follow to get where we need to get. I also recommend that the CAC propose a policy of developing an initial existing home decarbonization program, starting with a point of listing incentive program that requires initially easily attained energy efficiency and electrification upgrades for homes when they are sold. We need to start this now. We need to have it impact only limited number, and this is a good way to bring it about. If we don't start something now, it keeps being pushed off until all of a sudden we have a situation where everybody has to all at once transition to zero, and that isn't going to happen at all. So these things are going to take 2, 3, 4, 5 years even to become accepted. So we need to start. We can't just keep ignoring it. And the existing building stock needs to be converted as quickly as possible. So I think I have another idea. I'll wait till we have future agenda items to bring those forward. So thank you very much. Your work is important. Please continue pushing the City Council to do the right thing. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other hands raised.
Right on schedule. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, public commenters. We're going to move to any announcements.
Great, I have a few housekeeping announcements here. First one is that the active transportation plan is having its last call for public input on their website on November 26th. It's going to close at that point, so anyone who has more comments for the active transportation plan, please put those in. It's not the end of the whole process, but just of this public input period on the website. Also, at the December 5th Transportation Committee meeting, they'll be discussing the work on the ATP so far. If any of the members are interested in that, you can go to that meeting and listen or comment. It's a rescheduled meeting, so it's not on the normal calendar for transportation. Again, December 5th. And then also just news for the committee about how this works as we get to the end of the year for committee seats. So at the end of this year, all of the seats on the advisory bodies are automatically up for reappointment by the new council. So anyone who would like to continue serving on the Climate Action Committee or start serving brand new should apply to be on the Climate Action Committee, just like you did originally to join. And you can be appointed by any of the council members at that point. So it's kind of a little bit of a free-for-all. But you'll continue serving through December, assuming we do have a meeting in December, which we'll touch on later. And you possibly can also serve for the January meeting. There's kind of a grace period if the council member who appointed you hasn't appointed someone new yet, then you can continue to serve. That helps us keep quorum for that sort of difficult month when there's a lot of shifting around. So if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. And I encourage you all to reapply if you're interested in continuing to be on the CAC. And
To reapply if we're already on the CAC?
yes, if you're already on the CAC, all of the appointments are up for reappointment again, so you'll all have to reapply. And the information to do that is found on the city website. Any other announcements from the committee?
No.
Or questions? Yes.
Is the compost giveaway thing at the Gill Track still going on?
Yes, the compost hub. Yes, that is still happening.
Sundays 12 to 4?
Sorry?
Sundays 12 to 4?
That's right. Sundays 12 to 4. It is winter, so there's a little bit less activity, but there is still renewed compost there. I know that during the UC winter break, the farm does shut down.
December-ish, January-ish?
It's late December to very early January. When the school is closed down, there won't be people at the farm, so I'll post exactly what those dates are. But I think the last 2 Sundays in December. But aside from that, it is open.
I've also seen seeds and sometimes vegetables and bread there for donation. If you want to check it out too.
Yes, they have a donation farm stand is what they call it, and they also have a seed library, a native seed library there. Yeah.
We'll go along then to, I don't imagine anyone has comment on the announcements. We'll go on to presentations.
Okay. One moment. All right. Okay, so I'm going to start off our night with a short presentation on the soft story retrofit ordinance. So this is just a very brief overview of this existing ordinance that we have that's been in place for a little over a year now. And when I say a soft story retrofit ordinance, the first thing that comes to your mind is probably what does that mean? What's a soft story? And this is a demonstration of it here. Another term for it, the more technical term, is wood frame target story. And basically it's a type of construction that is very vulnerable to earthquake damage because it has wood frames, or wood framing that on the bottom story usually is significantly more vulnerable and just kind of less sturdy than the stories on top. Usually we see like a lot of garage door openings, for example, or even very large garage openings in apartment buildings. That's sort of the most common type. But you might also see like big windows in a storefront, for example. So there's just kind of a lot of missing wall. And what happens when you get that lateral movement from an earthquake is that it just sort of collapses and the building can fall sideways, like you see in these photos here. So it's a particularly high danger, both in terms of life safety, as you would imagine, and then also in terms of just the longevity of our buildings and making sure that they continue to be functional after a large earthquake. And so for that reason, this is, a big priority for the city. We have quite a few buildings like this, and we want to make sure that the residents who live in them are safe, and we also want to make sure that they're not displaced after an earthquake. And we also want to make sure that we don't have to rebuild half the buildings in the city after an earthquake, because we know that that has a really major impact on the climate and on waste. The emissions that it takes to build a new building are pretty significant. So this is something that has been wrapped into the Climate Action Plan, as well as several other city plans. This is an example of not knocked over soft story buildings here. So you can probably recognize fairly common in Albany. The one on the right is example of a cripple wall type building where the soft story is actually sort of half of that first story of the building, essentially. So like I said, there are quite a few of these buildings in Albany, and the ordinance that was passed last year requires them to be retrofitted to keep them secure during an earthquake. This is just an example of the two main forms of retrofitting that take place. The one on the left is where you add wood sheathing to the walls, basically just making them sturdier. And then on the right, installing a steel frame on that wall where it's sort of missing a lot of the wood that would be there if it was a full wall. This is a little bit of a history of the work on this. So this started all the way back in 2013 with a survey of soft story buildings that found that there were quite a few of them in Albany. And then in 2018 or 19, this started to really become a city priority and was listed in a whole slew of plans, including the Climate Action Adaptation Plan. And work on this began in February of 2019 when the council discussed it. In 2021, the council held a study session and directed staff to develop the ordinance itself and include all buildings with more than 3 units, which is a bit more extensive than you see in most other cities in the region, actually. Most of them do 5 or more units. But we found that we had a lot of 3 and 4 unit soft story buildings here. Staff conducted outreach, held a lot of meetings with both the building owner groups and renter groups, developed the ordinance, and then that was finally adopted in July of last year, and that's ordinance number 2023-04. The ordinance itself is relatively simple. Basically, it says that if you're a subject building, which means that you have a wood frame target story, you have 3 or more units, and you were built before 1980, then you need to get a retrofit of this particular type. And there's some sort of technical requirements about what that means. The reasoning that it's before 1980 is because that's when the building codes were updated to basically prevent this type of building from being built anymore. So those are the types of subject buildings. The process of the ordinance itself is that it started out with a notification to all of the buildings that might be subject. So ones that we knew had 3 or more units and were built before 1980 that may or may not have a target story. And then there's the screening phase where essentially all of the building owners had to get an engineer who's qualified to determine what kind of building they had to say whether the building had a target story or not and needed a retrofit or not. If you don't have a target story in your building, then you're done. But all the buildings that are subject to the retrofit requirement then have to get a permit for the retrofit work. do the construction and get an affidavit, basically kind of finalizing and confirming everything. The timeline for all these requirements varies a bit. We did it in tiers to sort of break things up, to create a little bit more time for the buildings where this would be a little bit more challenging, and also just to space out our work as city staff. So there are 4 tiers depending on the number of units in the building and whether or not there's a unit in that ground story. And all of the screenings were due last month on October 15th, and then the permit and construction is, spaced out based on which year you are. So by October 15th, 2029, all of the soft story buildings will have been required to get retrofitted and be completely done. This is, again, the screening process, which I mentioned. Essentially, we sent out the notification to a larger pool of buildings that are actually going to be in the program, and the owner has to get that licensed architect or engineer to actually do the determination for the building itself, and then submit that form back to us, and we put it into our system. We do have a few, well, actually a little bit more than a few buildings that have an alternative process if they want to, where I, as staff, can actually come out and screen the building. That's specifically for buildings with concrete walls, because even though I'm not a technical trained architect or engineer, I am able to tell the difference between wood and concrete, and I can see that they're not wood-framed target stories. So that's been really helpful to kind of shorten the process for a good number of buildings that are really easy to screen out. It just makes it easier for the building owners. So. Progress so far, we sent out the notifications last year, and the screening deadline, as I mentioned, passed last month. We haven't gotten all of the buildings screened yet. We've got quite a few that are overdue, which is not really a surprise. But we're working with those building owners to get them to complete the screening and get everything in order. And we've got an information session coming up on December 10th to help out both the building owners that haven't completed their screening yet, or who have and need to get a retrofit and have questions about that process. So, yeah, we're working along the way there, and we've already got some buildings that are getting ready to get retrofitted. And we're very excited to have a more sturdy city. And happy to answer any questions about that. Yes.
What's the average cost of a retrofit like that?
Great question. We actually don't have very good data on it, unfortunately. It seems to vary quite a bit depending on what exactly is going on in the building. It's been a little while since I looked at the numbers, to be honest with you, but I feel like the rough average was like several tens of thousands, like 40,000 or something. But like I said, the variation was really large. Yeah, but it's fairly expensive.
Yeah.
We are working to try and get FEMA and state funding for building owners, but we're doing our best on that. We don't have anything as of yet. Yeah.
Is the 40,000 per unit or for the entire building?
That's for the whole building, yeah.
What's the sort of feedback from the building owners? I mean, outrage, shrug, happy?
We did a lot of very extensive outreach with them during the process. And I think the main feedback that we got was that no one was surprised and that it felt like something that was necessary to do. For a lot of people, this is by far the biggest asset and investment that they have. And so protecting it from a very, very, very real risk makes sense. And so, there wasn't outrage or anything like that. But, we worked with them to try to make sure that the timelines felt realistic and that the screening process wasn't too onerous. But, there's also stress that comes from having to put a lot of money for a retrofit. And a lot of requests that we try to get funding, which, of course, we have and continue to do, but challenges there, of course.
In the ordinance that you included with the meeting materials, there was a provision that it would be made public which buildings, needed that retrofit. At the time the mandate went into effect, does that mean like now, like once the screenings are complete?
It's a great question. I don't actually know the answer to that off the top of my head. I think it's once we have the list of like the screened buildings that are in the program, which we have a partial list right now, so I can double check on that. But yeah, I think it would be something that we're probably working or probably planning to publish soon. I can double check though.
I'm also curious to know if any of the building owners have decided to sell their buildings or do any owner move-in issues because of this. I'm assuming not, but it sounds like a necessary retrofit that is part of their long-term planning, that you're doing sooner rather than later. So curious if there are any other reactions you've seen.
Not that I know. I mean, I've spoken to a few building owners that were like in the process of selling the building, but I don't think it was related to this. There was like, we have to know whether we're in the program or not as part of the sale, but I don't think anyone decided to sell because of the program. There have been one or two people that are like, I'm just gonna go get it retrofitted now and get it out of the way. But yeah, not too much.
Are there penalties if people, I know you're being really helpful and hand-holding, but at some point, is there no, enough's enough?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a code enforcement person, so I don't know all the details of how that works. Generally it takes a lot of warnings before we actually start penalizing people, but there is a certain line. And I think with something like this where it's a safety issue, theoretically the city could say like, you can't operate this as a rental if you're not gonna get this retrofitted. But again, that's outside of my authority, so I don't know exactly how it works.
I'm just curious, I was probably on the Climate Action Committee when this came through, but how did this get linked to climate action? This is earthquake, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this isn't sort of, this isn't like a climate action program necessarily, but it is in the climate action plan. Of course, that was written before my time here, but I think the link with, if we had a significant number of soft story buildings collapse in an earthquake, that would be a pretty significant climate impact for the city, just in terms of the amount of waste that it would generate, of pretty hazardous waste actually, and then the emissions required to build all of those new buildings would be pretty significant. So it's sort of not in the climate world first and foremost, but it does definitely have related impacts.
Would it make sense to have a sheet in the approved application that said, building owners, while you're at it, this is a great time to reduce the fire risk by replacing gas appliances, installing heat pumps and so on. Here's the rebates, here's the process.
Great question. So yes and no. We do try to, when we have sort of requirements like this, we try to kind of keep them as clean as possible and say like, this is what you have to do, and not add a bunch of stuff, because it can make it difficult to really get the message across and make things clear. That said, like I mentioned, I have been going out and doing inspections of some of these buildings, and that's actually been a really great opportunity to kind of meet with building owners face to face, have conversations, talk to them about other things going on with their building or with the city. And I've used a lot of those opportunities to mention, I'm working on electrification. Do you know about rebate programs? Do you need any help with, weatherization, all these kinds of things going on. And I've had a lot of interest from building owners in that sort of conversational opportunity when it seems like they're open to hearing about that. Sometimes building owners are just very businesslike and want to get it done. But yeah, so when those opportunities arise, we're definitely interested in trying to connect them with all the resources that exist. But we try to kind of keep the formal documentation separate.
Do you know, saw the different tiers of buildings, if there was any attention given to the locations of the buildings?
No, that's not included in the tiers at all. Yeah, I mean, it's all near the fault, so we didn't really distinguish.
Oh, yeah, no, it's sometimes the soils can be different, but yeah.
Yeah, we didn't get that specific. Other questions?
All right, do we have public comment?
Nick Peterson, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Nick Peterson with the Albany Climate Action Coalition. So anyway, I want to give a lot of credit to Council Member Preston Jordan, who really had brought this forward through the whole process and did make the linkage between the immense devastation and emissions from demolition and rebuild that would happen if these soft story structures weren't addressed. I also think we are beholden to citizens of our city that in good faith pay good money to building owners who have a commercial enterprise to provide safe and reasonable housing that won't collapse and kill you. So I think we shouldn't lose track of the fact that apartment buildings, multifamily buildings are commercial enterprises. These are business ventures. They have a lot of asset value, and the people that operate them are businesses. I know some of them are more like mom and pop, gets a little dicey. They think it's all going to be great money, but then the upkeep and maintenance kind of slips away. So a lot of these buildings are quite old, from the 60s and 70s, and have had very little done to them in that period of time. So I just really think this is such a great ordinance. And I concur with Committee Member Meldon that this is an opportunity to at least make people aware. I wish the city was more aware of which buildings were naturally occurring affordable housing. We should actually look at things that reward building owners that will do the retrofit, that will keep their rents down, that are really providing a very valuable asset to our community. And we should have incentives for them to do the electrification at the same time, because there's some efficiencies while they're tearing things up to be doing this now rather than later. So I would almost encourage maybe the CAT can recommend to City Council that they have sort of a linkage, take some of this Measure DD money and say if natural occurring affordable housing structures that are affected by this, could get certain things paid for, like electrical panel upgrades and other things. I think that would be hugely valuable, because they're just going to get hammered again at being a business, and as a business providing safe and modern and worthwhile housing in the city, at some point spewing emissions and leaking methane isn't going to be allowed either, and they're going to have to fix that hopefully sooner than later. So I would encourage the CAC to put some thought to that and perhaps leverage, piggyback on this work that's going to be happening over the next 8 years to help those natural occurring affordable housing owners.
No other hands raised.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion on this matter?
I guess I just was thinking, I don't know whether to be optimistic or pessimistic about this comment, but it's interesting to me that, you know, these people that have these investments are so willing to spend $30,000 to $40,000, and that's like, yeah, okay, I'm going to do it because it's such a clear consequence. You know, if I don't do this, my building's going to fall down if there's an earthquake. It's very clear, just boom, transactional, and just makes me feel like our job is so hard here in the Climate Action Committee because we're trying to convince people to invest in stuff that's much less expensive than this, that's going to have consequences, but it's such a big dotted line of consequences. You know, like if you don't reduce emissions, then sea level's gonna rise over time and flood your basement and knock your building down. You know, it's just like such a long dotted line, and it's, I don't know, again, it's a good example of, just human nature. Like if you show them a consequence and you get buy-in, they'll invest in it. And so I'm just like taking that away from this as not anything to do with this project, but just as a thought in my mind about how to address future things that we're trying to do here, because we keep on pounding our head against the wall, just trying to get a charging station in an apartment building. You know, it's like, it'd be $4,000 or $5,000, you know, something like that. So anyway, that's just my comment, just to bring that to everybody's awareness that that's in my head.
Yeah, that brings up the idea that safety brings urgency, but far off benefits don't have sense of urgency. So I know that's not a common thing to talk about in terms of happy things, but gas lines do explode, and that talking about the safety impact of gas might bring more attention to electrification, for example.
Any other comments? All right. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Michelle. That was really informative. Let's go on to 6.1, which is the Foodware Ordinance.
Absolutely. One moment. Okay, so I am going to be giving you a presentation updating on the Sustainable Foodware Ordinance with help from our wonderful Civic Spark fellow, Benji. I'll start off and let him finish up. But the two of us have been working on this quite a bit for the last few months since he arrived. Sorry about that. So a little bit of background, which you're probably all familiar with, but we might have a few audience members who aren't. This is an ordinance that regulates the type of foodware that restaurants and other food vendors are allowed to use in the city, making it more sustainable, in particular through the use of reusable foodware and compostable foodware. It was passed just this past September 16th, and the enforcement begins in a year on October 16th because we built in a year-long implementation period. Sorry, I'm realizing this is blocking the bottom of it here. Okay, well, there we go. Sorry, this is a little bit funky. Yeah, so we're currently in the implementation phase, basically giving enough time for the restaurants to get up to speed, to switch over their practices and their products and everything, and not take anybody by surprise. You'll note that it's actually 13 months because all ordinances have an extra 30-day window before enforcement begins. So that's what we're in the middle of right now. Some key requirements of the ordinance itself. There are some other smaller things in there as well, but big things that food vendors need to use reusable foodware for dine-in orders, foodware and utensils. And for their accessories, they need to be using compostable accessories for dine-in orders. For takeout orders, they can use reusable or compliant compostable foodware. And that in particular means foodware that is made of fiber and doesn't have any form of plastic, including compostable plastics, and is BPI certified. They also have to only provide accessories upon request or at self-serve stations, and charge 25 cents for the use of a disposable cup as its own separate charge on the bill. And there are also exemptions built into this, in particular for some of those compostable, disposable foodware items where compliant options don't currently exist. But yeah, so those are the main requirements. For the implementation phase, like I said, we're aimed at getting all businesses or all food vendors in the city into compliance by that deadline next year. That's our goal. Helping everybody transition to those compostable products for their disposables and switching to reusable foodware for dine-in. In particular, we have a lot of restaurants that do have some reusables for dine-in, but not all of them, and not the accessories, and kind of really getting at those last few things. And then another big piece of this is public awareness, and really kind of building up awareness about what the ordinance is, why it exists, and what it means to dine sustainably. I'm doing progress too. And so our progress so far, like I said, Benji and I have been working on this since he arrived back in late September. And we've been kind of building out our plan and putting together resources. So doing some research on similar ordinances that we were looking at back in our development phase, and looking at some of their implementation work and how that's been going, what works, what hasn't. Meeting with some of our other departments, in particular, speaking with the recreation department about events and how that all works, and talking to the folks in our economic development department, et cetera. So putting all those resources together. Also been working on the formal notification letter, which we plan to send very soon. This is, the actual formal notice to businesses that there is an ordinance that they need to comply with, and explaining what exactly is in the ordinance and where they can find more information. And then along with that, we're also kind of creating this suite of informational resources that will go on the website that we can basically send them to through the notification letter. And we'll continue building that out throughout the course of the year, but we've been working on a purchasing guide that has examples, really as many as we can find, of those compliant compostable products. An exemption list, which again will be iterative as we go, but we've got a few things on there now of products we know will be exempt. FAQs, signage that they can put up in their restaurants to, help customers know how to sort, flyers, other kind of sort of easily legible, image-focused types of things to help them understand what the ordinance is really requiring of them. So really just trying to build that out as well as we can and create a lot of resources for the businesses. So that's what we've been working on, and we're getting pretty close to it won't ever be totally finished, of course, but we're getting kind of to the launch point with the notification letter now. And with that, I'll hand it over to Benji. I'll hand it over to Benji now to talk about the sort of forward-looking part of this and our implementation strategies.
Yeah, so we've been focusing a lot on these 6 elements of implementation strategies, thinking about what we can do most effectively to meet that goal of having all businesses in compliance by next October. And so just going to give a little bit more context on each of these and thoughts that we've had so far, ideas that we think might be useful or effective as we get into these next 10 months. So starting off with consulting services, the possibility of hiring consultants to assist with the technical assistance and really that specialized knowledge that might help business owners. And then with that as well, what that one-on-one technical assistance might look like, whether it's a consultant or city staff, what that format might end up looking like and what might be most efficient. Developing those informational resources, so the ones that Michelle just mentioned, and then thinking about what other things are useful, what could be posted or spread to be most effective in making sure people actually understand the full lengths of the ordinance. Beyond that, thinking about educational events. So what opportunities do we have to teach people not only about what the ordinance includes, but to teach them about the far-reaching effects of the ordinance, why it's important, why it is being, or it was passed and put into place. And then beyond that, thinking about how we can increase collaboration with business associations and build those channels between businesses themselves, and then thinking about what methods of public outreach would be most effective with this specific kind of ordinance. So to start a little bit talking about the consultant services that we've been looking into, a really big question regarding this has been how technical assistance could be most effectively given to business owners. With consultants, we have the opportunity for more specialized knowledge, more efficient task covering, I guess you could say, in a way, where they have a list of items that need to be, or tasks that need to be completed with businesses. They're able to be more efficient, get them done in a more specialized way than if it were just city staff performing that technical assistance. With that, we are expecting that city staff will help as needed with that technical assistance, whether it's just one-to-one going to business owners and chatting with them just for some added context, or doing more of that hard sit down, figure out what products work, what don't. So right now a possible plan is to start with a small contract, see how it goes, see what works effectively, and then potentially expand that once we understand the needs and the benefits of it better. And then in terms of educational efforts, firstly, we're thinking about possible workshops, things like teaching people how to sort waste correctly, so that as this ordinance is being implemented, we're actually following through on the goals of it and making sure the waste is getting to where it needs to go, as well as collaborating with the Chamber of Commerce and the Solana Avenue Association, so that way we can build those lines of communication between business owners especially. So that way, as we're getting through this phase, it's not just a business owner talking to a consultant or talking to city staff, but business owners who find success in certain products are able to use lines of communication with other business owners to share that. So that way it becomes more of a wealth of knowledge for all food vendors across Albany, which might just lead to more effective implementation in the long run. And then as we thought about outreach strategies, we've been thinking a lot about events, specifically A, how can we tailor events to fit the ordinance, but then B, what events would be possible to help spread information about the ordinance. So thinking about maybe some kind of foodware-based event where people have the chance to come and see different product examples, or just something simple where they can get their hands on the materials, see really what possible options exist as they transition to those compostable disposables, or maybe they're really interested in a certain kind of reusable, or just giving them that option for an almost expo-like experience. And then beyond that, thinking about how we can engage volunteers. As we heard at the last CAC meeting, there's more energy towards people wanting to assist with CAC activities and general activities around Albany. And so we're trying to think, how can we use volunteers to potentially increase that public outreach, talk with business owners, spread information, help even just put up flyers or something like that. What are the different ways that volunteers can be utilized to make this ordinance more effective in its implementation phase? And then we're also thinking about ways to involve schools, students and parents. There were some public comments on the CAP in 2019 that were voicing that there was a pretty significant desire for students and parents to be involved in more conversations about climate and about the cap, specifically in Albany. And so thinking about ways that we might be able to spread more information and interact more with students and parents so that outreach is spread widely, not just to business owners, but to the people who are most often going to those businesses as patrons. So at this point, happy to answer any questions. Really looking forward to any thoughts, comments, opinions that you might have on what we can do next.
Yeah, love the outreach plans, events, filters of schools, right what I was thinking as well. The ACAC and Rotary in particular are great climate groups to talk to, and I really like the idea of having the hands-on experience of like, can you give a volunteer or anybody who wants in the community, give them some sample products and a bunch of flyers, and then say, hey, go forth and talk to your restaurants, because I could keep that in my backpack when I go bike to a restaurant or something and say, hey, I'm ordering dinner. By the way, did you know about the new ordinance? Because it's one thing to hear about it as a requirement from the city, but having the customer demand show up and they're ordering food, it's like, by the way, here's the example of what it could be in, and here's the rule coming up in a year. You might actually save money on this because dishwashing can be cheaper than buying a bunch of plastic stuff. So a lot of people don't know that it can be cheaper. So emphasizing the cost potential for reduction, but also arming people with the samples to bring around, kind of like Tupperware parties, or you think about the samples, eat for free snacks at Berkeley Bowl. They have like try these noodles, and then you can, I'm now addicted to noodle. There's some great noodles. I love it from this one sample I got years ago. So I get people hooked on the free samples, kind of model.
Just a note that we're doing questions first, if anyone has any questions. Not seeing questions here, so public comment, please.
Nick Peterson, go ahead.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you very much, staff, for getting this moving along. This has been just really a fantastic accomplishment, and Albany Climate Action Coalition has thought a lot about this too. One thing that the ordinance, actually I think it's state law, customers can bring their own foodware that they can use at a restaurant. If they bring their own plate and cutlery, bring their own takeaway boxes. And this would not only be very useful from the point of view of reducing waste, but also would save, the restaurant itself would not be losing any of their purchased disposable and compostable components. So I think it might be a good idea in public outreach, and maybe there can be I'm going to propose this with the ACAC members, that there be a kind of dining kit that has sort of the best reusable, non-plastic materials for, plate, bowl, cup, eating utensils, takeaway box that comes like a kit. And I'm thinking of, you go to REI and you see these camping kits that are really lightweight and easy to lug around. And I've started to develop one of those myself, just really with cups and bamboo cutlery. But it seems like rather than have everybody have to figure that out by themselves, there may be a way to research, create a kit, and then we could mass purchase the kits, put them together, and then even make them available to the businesses where they could say, hey, if you come and have your first meal here with us, we'll give you a free reusable kit or something like that. And I'm sure we could maybe even use Measure DD funds to help fund some of that, or I'm sure we could raise donations to help fund that. But I think that would be a very successful way to do it. The other thing I always think about efficiency of effort. And I know there are a few businesses in Albany that have really put a lot of effort into what is it going to take, and they've been very serious about it. And I think allowing them to be more like mentors of the ones coming up, and actually setting up show and tells for the business owners to get together, meet, and hear how some of their fellow business owners have approached this, and learn from that, I think is an excellent idea. I really think this period of outreach and education is going to be critical to how this succeeds in the future. Thank you very much.
It looks like no other hands raised.
I might suggest that we take this moment to pause and do our bathroom break before we get into discussion.
Discussion? Yeah, sure, that's great. Okay, we're gonna adjourn for a 5-minute break. It's 7:55, we'll come back at 8. 8 so we can get started. But we're short, Eric, so let's get started slowly. Does anyone have any slow discussion of this item?
I have a follow-up that I forgot to mention, is that, this question is, how is the city keeping track of all restaurants? Is it like in a big spreadsheet? Do you have a CRM? Like, what tools are you using to keep track of the progress?
Yeah, so we have basically data from our business licenses. That's how we know which restaurants we have. Because we haven't really started to get into the sort of meat of it, we haven't developed our tracking just yet, but I expect that we'll basically create a spreadsheet from our business licenses and essentially track where they are on each of the requirements through that. And at some point soon, we'll also start working with the finance department that are the ones that process business licenses to make sure that we're on top of new food vendors.
I think you mentioned in the memo that, you know, for now, well, actually, Benji also mentioned in his presentation, you know, there's a lot of, no, it was in the memo. You'll be updating the list of compliant stuff, compliant foodware. I imagine that that will be forever changing. Do we have anyone else we can lean on for that as we move into maintenance mode?
Yes. First of all, we're already leaning on people because Benji took a lot of it from the city of Arcata, which is great because they have very similar requirements. So, you know, we're looking at the other cities that have similar requirements. I think the biggest thing is that we've talked in the past a little bit about SB 54, which is a state law that is going to be regulating foodware and other forms of packaging, and, you know, recyclability and compostability. And so as we sort of see exactly how that law takes shape, that's going to have a pretty big impact on what's compliant, what's out there on the market, and how we distinguish between it. So we'll be keeping a pretty close eye on that, and I think there's a good chance that that law makes our job much easier.
I'm also wondering about, I think I heard that the plastic bag ban, insofar as there is any, will be changing. I can't remember if that's a state level part of SB 54 or something else.
Yeah, that's a new state law. I haven't read it, so I could have details wrong, but I believe it's like a true plastic bag ban because it's getting rid of the thick plastic bags that are currently very common. I don't know exactly what it applies to, but I think it's pretty broad.
So I was wondering if we could do outreach about that, but it sounds like it's a little premature.
It's a good question. I think it's definitely worth looking into and seeing if it makes sense to combine them. Yeah.
Just have a kind of a comment / question. You know, just from a layman's standpoint, it seems like the takeout part of this thing will be the harder one because, you know, the restaurant's preparing the food before you get there, packaging it up, and then you come in and people want to just take and dash. What's your thoughts on how to support and change that part of it? Is that where a big part of where the consultants are going to help out, or how do you see? I mean, or do you see it the same way? Is that the harder aspect of this?
I'd say I think it's the more complicated part because, you know, getting the compostable products right is tricky, honestly, and finding good substitutes for the things that the businesses are using and the exemptions, like that's definitely tricky. And then also trying to get as much reusables into takeout as we can is really tricky. Both with bring your own and with the services that exist. I think it's all the things that Benji was talking about with, trying to do the kinds of outreach and events that allow businesses to really kind of get up close and personal with the products and understand like really what it is that they need to be switching over to and what might work for them, and collaborating with each other on that. And then, I think that's where, when we're talking about the technical assistance and with consultants, that's a lot of where I think it's going to be focused, is trying to help businesses really understand, what their options are and how to make that transition. You have more thoughts?
No, I would agree with pretty much all of that. I would say that when we're looking at consultants, certain consultants have much more specialized experience in that disposable element of ordinances such as this, while others are more focused on the reusables. And so knowing that that's a more complicated part here in Albany is definitely fueling sort of how we're looking into different consultants and what might be most appropriate in the next steps.
When this was under development, you shared about a couple different companies that offer different reusable takeout systems. I'm wondering if they could maybe come, if there were an expo of products, if they could maybe come to that.
Yeah, we didn't touch on it a ton because it's not a requirement in the ordinance, but it's definitely going to be part of the outreach. And I think especially in coordination with the cup charge and talking about ways to avoid charging your customers for cups. We definitely plan to be building that in a few ways. I don't know off the top of my head whether they, there are some complexities because they're private companies and we can't necessarily recommend individual companies, but maybe if we open it up to any of those types of companies that want to come, we could do something like that. So we can definitely think about that.
I've used both Deliver Zero and Dispatch Goods, and Deliver Zero is all plastic containers, so it isn't that much better than the standard takeout, in my opinion. I think use it as a consumer. The Dispatch Goods one did have stainless steel with a plastic top, which is better in terms of avoiding chemicals and plastic in your food for hot items, especially hot, oily items. So I don't know if they're still serving in the Bay Area, but might be interesting to think about if the reusable containers are actually glass or metal versus plastic as well.
Any more discussion on this item? Great. This is exciting. I'm glad it's happening.
Yeah, we'll keep updating you guys as we, get closer and kind of formalize our plan a little bit more, but yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go on now to item 6.2, an update on the heat pump rebate program.
Thank you for focusing on every syllable of that.
Well, that transcription thing.
Yeah, I know.
It makes me realize
I know.
how important it is to enunciate.
Okay, so time for another update, this one on the heat pump rebate program. A little bit of background on the program itself. So here's the timeline of it. This is obviously a rebate. It's funded by the city for heat pump HVAC systems installed in Albany. This was created way back in March of 2022 with $45,000 in funding. The funding coming from the Measure DD or Utility Users Tax Climate Action Fund, which I always am careful to note is in fact general fund money, but nevertheless. So it was created in March 2022 and then launched in June of that same year. In February of 2023, we had pretty much run out of the initial funding and returned to council for $65,000 in additional funding. And also a few changes, including the creation of a moderate income level rebate amount. And then in February of this year, went back again to council for another $75,000 in funding, bringing the program to a grand total of $180,000. And then also increased the low and moderate income levels quite substantially, which leads us to where we're at now. So there are 3 rebate amounts depending on income. There's the standard level, which any Albany building owners is eligible for, and then moderate and low income. Moderate is under 120% of the area median income, and low income is under 80%. And then there's different amounts depending on whether the heat pump is ducted or ductless. And then there's also a bonus if you're installing an electrical or upgrading your electrical panel as part of the project, not just an upgrade on its own. Eligibility is pretty broad, honestly. It's all buildings in Albany with a limit of 1 rebate per housing unit, but it's open to multifamily and non-residential buildings as well, although we haven't actually had any of those, but it is open to those. It's open to any contractor, even owner-builder, contractor list projects theoretically, and you just have to apply for the rebate within 4 months of receiving your building permit. We also have a contractor bonus for contractors that sign up with the tech or Bay Run programs as well. That is $750. So just a quick summary of the results so far. We have reserved or paid 87 rebates in total, which is a pretty high number for a small town. 6 of those went to low-income households and 7 to moderate-income households. And as of right now, we still have a good chunk of the funding remaining, over $50,000. So we're not at the point right now where we're running particularly low on funds, but there have been some shifts in the whole rebate picture, so it seemed like a good time to talk about it. This chart below here is the amount of the funding paid, reserved, or remaining. So as you can see there, over half of it has been paid, and about a third of it remaining. And then on the right side, this is the low and moderate income household. So like I mentioned, there's 6 and 7, so not a huge number. But if you look at the stages of the program, which are sort of those 3 phases that I talked about in the timeline slide, you can see that the percent that are going to, in particular, moderate income households, but low income as well, has been increasing during that time. So every time we've shifted the program to kind of enhance those equity benefits, it has been having an impact, although it's not overwhelming. There's some interesting data in terms of heat pumps in general and the rebate program. Heat pumps have been getting more and more and more popular every single year in a pretty stark way, honestly. If you look back in 2020, they were only 10% of the HVAC permits we got. And now we're at about 80% in just 4 years. So pretty impressive. Yeah. So again, this is for our permits. We're definitely missing some, but it's a pretty high number. It seems like the market has really developed in the time that we've had this program. It's become commonplace. It's easy to find a contractor that can do this. The relative cost has gone down a bit, so everything's getting more expensive, but the incremental cost has decreased a bit versus gas. And it's just sort of the popular thing to do now, right? This same thing can be seen in in the image on the right here, furnace installations are the blue bar and heat pumps are the orange bar. And you can see there's sort of some waves in the actual number of total installations that happen over time. But again, you can see that just the percentage-wise, heat pumps are becoming way more popular.
What are the A and B numbers in the charts?
Oh, yes, thank you. That's just splitting the year up into 6-month periods, so the first and second half of the year. Just because we have such a small number of heat pumps, it's a little easier to do it that way. Thanks for asking that. The thing that's a little bit interesting here is that even though we've had such an increase in the popularity of heat pumps and actually in the raw number of heat pump installations, we've actually seen a decrease in rebate applications. Not hugely stark decrease, but a decrease nonetheless. And so there's an increasing number of people that are installing heat pumps and they're not getting rebates, either because they don't know about the program, they're getting a heat pump anyways, it's just not part of their incentive structure, or because they don't care because it's not a big enough amount to matter to them. So, that's raised some questions about how we structure the program, how much value it's bringing, what role it plays in the sort of current state of the market. Some other things along with that, though, we have continued to see fairly consistent results when we ask this question for our applicants about whether they would have installed a heat pump without the program. Most of them are saying probably, where they seem to be sort of on the fence. They're leaning towards a heat pump, but they're not for sure there. We do have some people in the definitely column, and we also have quite a few people in that maybe column who really are on the fence. We also have about a third of the rebate applicants that say that they only knew a little bit about heat pumps before they heard about the program, so it does seem to be increasing knowledge and sort of awareness and attention still. And in particular for our low and moderate income recipients, many of them are selecting maybe when asked if they would have installed the program. And 15% actually said probably not. So that sort of impact in shifting their mind seems to be even more pronounced, which we would expect considering the lower incomes and the larger rebate numbers. So it does still seem to be having an impact on the recipients, but there's more and more people that are choosing not to get rebates. Along with that, we have some pretty big shifts in the rebate landscape over the last couple of weeks. You guys might have heard about this, maybe not, but there have been several program launches and continuations. The most significant one is the HERA rebate program, which we've spoken about a few times in this committee. This was created by the Inflation Reduction Act back in 2022, I believe, maybe 2023. And so it's finally launched. It has two sides of it. One is for single-family homes, and that only covers heat pump HVAC systems. It offers $4,000 for moderate income households and $8,000 for low income households. So some pretty big numbers here. They also have a more expanded definition of moderate income. That's 150% area median income. There's actually, covers a pretty large proportion of people. I don't have actual numbers, but it's a pretty large window there. And then there's also the multifamily program. In Albany, this only covers low-income buildings. If you're in a disadvantaged community, it can also be a moderate income building, but that doesn't count for us. But if 2/3 of the tenants are low income, then you can get up to $14,000 per unit for a variety of upgrades, including $8,000 for heat pumps per unit. So again, very large numbers we're talking about. This program does have a limited amount of funding for the state of California. It's about, 50, what was that? Yeah, I think it's 40 for 40 to 50 million for each of the two programs. So it comes out to like 80 or 90 million total. So a lot of money, but across the state, not that much money. It's unclear how long the program is going to last before it runs out of funding. And there is a second round of funding planned, although to be honest, I'm not sure what the future looks like in terms of how much of that money will be released and whether the state will end up getting it and what the timeline looks like. So there's some sort of uncertainty there. Secondly, there's the tech program. This has been in place for a few years and sort of has serial releases of more funding. They just launched another round of funding for heat pump HVAC systems for $1,500 that is not income qualified, although it drops down to $1,000 if you don't replace your furnace. And then there's a $2,000 tax credit from the IRS. And then there's also Bayren, which had a Home Plus program that we had spoken about a few times that offered a variety of rebates. They've shifted that program, and they're going to be relaunching as a direct installation program for moderate income households pretty soon. So that's sort of still in the works. It will be covering heat pumps, but sort of along with whole building upgrades, essentially. All that's to say that right now, there's a lot of money on the table for heat pump HVAC systems. For low-income households in particular, it totals up to $17,500, which is basically covering the entire cost of an installation. Of course, there's complications that come with that about stacking all the rebates and whatever else. But the point is, it's a lot of money. So, $1,000 from the city of Albany starts to look a little bit less significant in this very large pot. But then again, there's these shifting tides and a lot of changes and uncertainties about how long things last. So it's a bit complex. Which brings me to the final piece of this, which is program considerations. I don't have a recommendation for tonight, and I don't expect any sort of decision to be made, but it seemed like a good time to start having these conversations and just kind of teasing out things that are important, priorities, questions to think about, as we move into the future. So one of the first big questions is, do we continue the program? Do we let it run out of funding and then sunset it? Do we just keep on going and ask for more funding? Do we shift the program? Do we end it now? Do we pause it until the HERO rebates run out? What do we want the future of it to look like? Do we keep going? Is there a better use for the $50,000 that are still unreserved, right? Second question, assuming we keep the program going, is do we want to shift the way that we're setting apart the different types of rebates? Do we want to, for instance, change the difference between ducted and ductless rebates? Right now, ductless heat pumps get quite a bit less money, especially when you get into the moderate and low income tiers. But ductless heat pumps have become a fair bit more common in the city since we originally created the program. There's still a fairly large gap between the costs, but we're starting to see more people who are installing a series of ductless heat pumps, and then that starts to really add up. So, you get into like these technically I can't give you as much as it seems like maybe you should be getting for the project you're doing kinds of things. So it might be worth considering that. There's also the question of water heaters. Heat pump water heaters have become more common than they were in the past, but they're not keeping up the pace with heat pump HVAC systems. You can see on this chart here that, the curve is going upwards, but it's not as fast. The last 6 months have really seen kind of a dip since the tech program ended its funding for water heaters. there's some room for growth there. And additionally, because this is only our permit data, there's a lot more people that are getting gas water heaters without a permit than people who are getting a new gas furnace without a permit. So I'm actually thinking that the difference is a fair bit starker. So maybe that's something to look at. On the flip side, the data that we have shows that the incremental cost of a heat pump water heater has become very small, actually. The difference was only about $500. Again, that's probably not totally accurate. It's just based on our permit data, but it does seem like the difference has really narrowed a lot in the last few years. So maybe there's less of a need. Something to consider. Final thing to think about is our income levels. As I mentioned, the moderate income level for our program is 120% AMI or lower, but for the HEBA program, it's 150%. There might be some value in kind of matching up with this very large program, or maybe we think that that number we've set it at is right for Albany, or we want to do something totally different. Lots to think about. So that's all to say. There's a lot of factors to consider. There's a landscape that's changed a lot recently, and also a sort of larger scale picture that's changed in the last few years. So I'm curious to hear what you all think and what you think are priorities. There was also some discussion at the committee a few months ago about potentially creating a subcommittee to talk about this further. That's not necessary. It's not necessary to make this happen, but if there are committee members that are interested in that, I think there could be some really fruitful conversations. So wanted to throw that out there as a possibility as well. And with that, I'll stop talking and open it up for questions.
First question is there a decision point coming up where a decision is needed about the funding, or is it more just general question with the federal elections, like what this decision point is?
Yeah, so theoretically, there's a decision point once the funding runs out. But like I said, we're still upwards of $50,000, so I expect that won't be for a while. It's really just about trying to keep up with the times and, be reacting to this kind of quickly changing situation with rebates.
You mentioned that the permit data gives you information about the cost of the water heaters. When people submit for their permits, do you get a picture of total cost of all the work happening for example, if you're doing a ducted HVAC, there's work on the ducts, and you get information about that?
Yeah, so when we get permits, they have to fill out the total cost of the project. We just get the one number, so it's not divided by anything, but it's the total cost of all of the work being done. So it would include ducts and that sort of thing.
When people give you that estimated project cost, what incentive do they have to be accurate?
It's a great question. To be honest, there's not a huge incentive to be accurate, but there's also not much of an incentive to be inaccurate, because it doesn't have any impact on the cost of the permit, at least it does for some projects, for really large ones, but those are much more involved. For the types of permits they're getting for a heat pump, it doesn't have any impact on the cost of the permit itself. And so it's really easiest, the contractor is the one filling out the form, and it's very easy for them to just look at the quote that they gave and write that number down and not have to think about it. So I think for the most part, they're probably pretty accurate, because there'd be no reason to make up something else.
Another question. If someone applies for a rebate for a ductless system, do they have to remove the gas furnace?
For the City of Albany rebate, we don't require that they remove their gas furnace. However, they aren't eligible for the permit fee waiver if they don't remove the gas furnace. So we do waive permit fees, which is about $300 if you're switching over completely. But we don't require it for the rebate itself.
I was gonna say, thanks for bringing out the nuance of the furnace versus the water heater part, because I wouldn't have guessed that. Is the HERA program only for the furnace type, I mean, the HVAC, it's not for water heaters at all?
For the single-family program, it's only for HVAC. For the multifamily program, they cover water heaters along with, induction cooktops and several other things.
So that graph that you showed, the water heater rebates or permits dipping, and your question about whether we should, adjust. It seems like your message is there's a lot of money going into HVAC rebates and not so much into water heaters. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's definitely the case right now. There's very little funding for water heaters, and there's a lot for HVACs.
Good.
In the past, it's been the other way around, but right now, that's definitely the case.
And off the top of your head, how much carbon reduction would one get from a heat pump HVAC compared to a heat pump water heater? Is it like a factor of 6, factor of 8?
So, based on the data I've seen, they're pretty close to each other, but it depends a lot on the house. Like, if you have a really big house with 2 people living in it, then the HVAC's gonna be a way bigger factor. But in the houses in Albany where they're really small for the most part, you're probably looking at something they're closer to each other. Usually the HVAC is gonna be more carbon, but I think in Albany, they're not too far apart.
And one more question. This is a political question. Can the new administration claw back the money that's been allocated for the HERA program?
Great question again. I don't know, but I don't think so. So, the program has launched. I don't know exactly how all the details work, but I would imagine that the funding is now in the state's hands and is sort of en route to be sent to people directly. Like it's far enough down the tube that I don't think it can be clawed back at this point. However, there is a second round of funding planned, and that's sort of still in planning phases and production. That second round, which is larger, I think is more in the air.
Thank you.
I see no more questions, so we could go to public comment.
Nick Peterson, go ahead.
Thank you, Michelle, for a very excellent update and a lot of interesting things to think about. I would be more encouraging to keep at least what's funded now in place, but maybe there's a way to try to make it more impactful for low and moderate, and where you have just normal income people that are doing larger projects that seem to be the ones that said they probably would have done it anyway. It seems like we really want it to be an incentive that incentivizes people to make the change. First, you need to really let them know, here's what you're gonna get, and it has to be a pretty reasonable amount. And then second of all, they have to know how to go about it. So it seems like if there's a way to do some targeted outreach, or maybe you just do a broad city mailing that says, there's money available for swapping the systems out, and if you're low to moderate income, you could get the majority of it paid. And then try to really get people to sign up for a combination of the Albany plus the HERA rebates. Even give them some assistance in how to do that, or work with someone, some entity that would do that. But at least try to get the information out that, hey, you should really do this. And do similar things with the gas water heaters. Because I know what usually happens, and I just heard of another incident like this, water heater goes out, it needs to be replaced right away because you need hot water, so the quickest thing that happens is just put in another gas one. Whereas if there was some way they could get a really quick heat pump water heater, and especially with the 110 versions that don't need the 240 volt install, that would be really useful. So I think establishing an Albany rebate for that specific kind of swap out would be really great, almost to the point where, since I've heard mixed things on the water heaters. When I did mine, it was a little under 4,000, and then I've heard other people spend, getting quotes of 10 to 14,000 to put in a heat pump water heater. So I think there's a lot of finagling going around with the contractors on, trying to game the rebates. But I think gas water heating use is still pretty high in Albany, and there's an opportunity to get people to make the shift if they're informed, in my opinion. Thanks.
And Lucinda Young, go ahead.
Hi, I'm sorry I don't have very much voice here. I hope you can hear me okay. I had a couple of comments. Michelle had mentioned that a lot of people were installing heat pump HVACs but not applying for the Albany rebates. And I suspect that is because they don't meet the income requirements. And it's only $1,000 rebate if you do not income qualify, if my understanding is correct. So I'm wondering if that may have something to do with it. Also, Michelle indicated that there was a $500 incremental difference on average for between the heat pump hot water and the gas hot water. My experience is, and I've had quite a bit of experience with it because I got several bids for our own home as well as bids for my mother-in-law's condo in Oakland, and have talked to several friends. My experience is that it's significantly more than that. The bids we got were 2 to 3 times what the cost of putting in a gas hot water would be, and that's for both my home and my mother-in-law's home. And a friend just recently in Albany got a bid, and it was $17,000 to put in a heat pump hot water. So, I'm not sure where the $500 came from, but my own personal experience is that is an underestimate. And also, I just wanted to respond to Mark's question about whether the funds, the HERA funds that California has already gotten, if those can be taken back. And my understanding is from other environmental organizations that I've attended where this question has come up, is that no, that money is secure. However, it's unlikely or very much at risk that the second rollout is going to actually materialize, but that the money that we already have is secure. And I also just wanted to mention that my understanding is, and I don't know, Michelle, if you have information on this or not yet, but I understand that Tech Clean is going to have a new hot water heat pump rebate rolling out soon. I also, as far as continuing with the rebates, I think the fact that the graph shows that the heat pump hot water installation really dropped off when the Tech Clean rebate ended, that to me says that these rebates really do make a big difference. So I would strongly urge us to continue with them. Thank you.
No other hands raised.
Thank you. Before we go to discussion as a timekeeping question, I'm wondering if there will be an update from the zero emission transportation? Okay, great. Let's go ahead and discuss this item.
Couple thoughts. One thing to note is that the Bay Area Air Quality Management District has new air quality rules that go into effect in 2027 and 2029, so that's in a couple of years. And one of the barriers to getting people to be able to comply with those future requirements for no new gas and no new water heater and HVAC system is an electrical panel and service capacity. So if someone has to, if one water heater breaks and then you have to upgrade the panel and get a service upgrade and get a transformer to the block, like that's going to be a 2-year wait from PG&E potentially, depending where they're located and if they have the service capacity for that. And so I did a HVAC and water heater like pretty quickly because I got the panel done first. I knew this was coming. People may not know that the service upgrade may be required or a panel upgrade may be required before they do all this stuff. People don't want to be left with no hot water in winter or something because they don't have the panel for it. So I would argue that because there's these mandates coming down in a couple of years, it might be worthwhile to focus on the panel aspect of things and help people and keep the rebates going because they do seem to keep people engaged, but also get them ready to prepare for that. And particularly with the LMI focus, a lot of low-income folks don't have the cash flow to like put out the money up front. So I don't know if it's possible to help pay for the thing up front or not. It's only after the fact, maybe kind of hard, but it potentially, you could only have LMI benefits and then double the rebate amount. You might still have less than you expect people using it because there's still a lot more people using the program tend to be higher income folks. And if you had to make more of an impact, could be even a larger amount, but with fewer people. And then given the federal changes coming down the pipeline potentially, I think it's even more important than ever to continue and not go stop and start because people will maybe lose faith in that there is rebates available later. Just to keep it continuing going might be especially helpful now with the federal changes. So those are my thoughts on how to keep it going.
Yeah, I also feel pretty strongly we should keep it going in light of federal level uncertainty. I don't see any reason really to pause it. You asked a question about whether to possibly adjust moderate income up to 150% of AMI. I would be in support of that. It looks like from the numbers you were showing us that essentially the rebates are still a powerful, measurably powerful incentive for low and moderate income people. So I guess I'm agnostic on whether we at all continue rebates for people above 150. But I would certainly support expanding it to people up to 150 for that moderate category. And it's, I mean, we've talked in the past about sort of like equity and climate justice sort of permeating all of the decision-making, and I think it stands to reason that that's one way to do it, is make sure that our public funds are trying to bring people up. And I guess just one more note on the 150% of AMI. I looked at what that would be, and that's like quite a substantial income, but people in this town are pretty housing burdened. Even people who are pretty high income are still paying often half their income on housing. So whatever it takes to get people over that hurdle. I think that's all I have to say.
I was just going to say I was pretty swayed by the figures of how much money is going into the HVAC and how little there is in in water heaters, and how that's declining. And if like you said, Albany's got limited funds, and if we're one small component of HVAC, or we could shift and make a big impact on water heaters, that to me was a pretty compelling thought for potentially transitioning some or all the future version of the HVAC into water heater. So I think that was a pretty interesting idea, and the data seems to give us some reason to think about that.
I'm wondering, do you know if the HERA program requires having a permit pulled? It's a random question, but I thought, what's up?
I believe tech does.
Tech does.
This tech is running the HERA
It's
rebate.
running here. Because what I'm wondering is, if you were showing that there was a decline in like permits pulled for these heaters. The other two revenue opportunities for when you're installing a heat pump water heater are a tax credit, which doesn't require a permit, and the Golden State, which doesn't require a permit. So the one that requires the permit went away, and now people aren't pulling the permits. Doesn't mean they're not installing heat pump water heaters, they just don't need the permit.
That's
Get the
true. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, we don't have any data on how many people aren't pulling permits. My assumption has been that people who are not pulling permits are much more likely to be getting a gas water heater because it's usually a simpler project and there's like less wiring stuff going on. But I think you're right that it's very possible that there are plenty of people installing heat pump water heaters without a permit too. But yeah, it's hard to know.
On the cost front, I have a friend who got some heat pump water heater quotes, and that friend, got one that was 10 grand. I mean, the cost comparison is quite varied.
Yeah, it was interesting what Lucinda was saying as well. So I'll definitely do some more research on it because I was surprised, honestly, by looking at our permit data and the costs there. And I'm sure it varies a lot, but yeah, it'd be good to get some other forms of data, I think, before decision making. So I'll definitely look into that more.
The program's great, and thanks for the update, and I hope we can expand it, and I think that aligning it on the 150% of AMI makes sense just from a policy perspective and based on our objectives and everything. Thank you for the presentation and update.
Would like to see maybe another round of outreach. Commenter, I think Nick mentioned the possibility of doing a direct mailing. That seems like a kind of a simple thing that would be pretty effective in reaching everyone. And then you had previously mentioned that you offered a webinar a couple years ago, and it might be time to offer that one more time. 'Cause I think one thing the rebates definitely do is just raise awareness and then help nudge people.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we have been working on a series of social media posts about all the rebates out right now. So been doing that, but yeah, we can definitely look into mailers and webinars and similar things. Little question that's come up as you've all been chatting. I think the concept about water heaters going out and people just automatically going to the gas furnace, that's something that's been brought up quite a bit as a big problem. I'm curious if you guys have interest in maybe thinking about some sort of incentive to help people like pre-wire for a heat pump, even if they're not installing one now. Or yes. Yeah, pre-wire for a heat pump water heater and kind of do the electrical work required. This is like off the top of my head, so I'd have to look into it, obviously, but it seems like maybe that could be an interesting kind of smaller scale project in terms of cost that helps people get ready and get ahead of the game. There are some complexities in terms of like, you don't want to encourage panel upgrades that aren't necessary, because oftentimes, they aren't necessary if you're kind of being smart about the way you're doing things. But sometimes they are very necessary, and a lot of times electrical work is very necessary. So if there's interest in that, that's something I can look into and think about as well.
I would support research on that. That's like a great idea. And I also want to distinguish between a panel upgrade and a service upgrade. A panel upgrade is like, do you have more slots for more circuits in your house? And some panels are old or fire hazards. I had to replace an old one that was small and have known to be a fire hazard to have a new one now. service upgrade is how much juice goes to the house. If people don't know the difference between those two, they assume that the service upgrade goes with the panel upgrade. It doesn't. They're different things. So you can get a new panel and still have 100 amps. Or you can get a new panel and upgrade to 200 amps. But if everyone does it at the same time, that causes a transformer upgrade, which has cascading effects. So it's something to people educated on about there is a distinction between getting a new panel could be safer, more room, versus the more juice to the house that causes cascading effects, which may be necessary, but it's good to know the distinction.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that distinction. Yeah, I think the service upgrade is what I meant there with the complications. But, yeah, other interest in that concept, generally, I'm seeing nods.
Yeah, I guess it might be simplified into just an incentive for a service upgrade. Because most of the things that people would want a service upgrade for would reduce carbon emissions on site. You know, it could be an EV charger, heat pump, HVAC, or heat pump water heater. I guess some people might get a service upgrade so that they could just put in whole house air conditioning, so it would be bad. But most of it would be good.
Yeah, we did talk about this way back when we were first developing the program, which is kind of what I was alluding to a bit with, some of the concern that came up is, first of all, there's a lot of panel upgrades and service upgrades happening in Albany, so not all of them are really related to electrification necessarily, and it could run out of money pretty fast. But yeah, also, there's been a lot of work done recently that you can electrify homes without needing to upgrade the service very often, and if the more we can do that, the better, because then it starts to create, like Catherine was saying, these cascading effects of not having enough capacity for everyone. So yeah, I think that's something I want to kind of dig into, is like, where's the middle ground where we're not trying to push people to upgrade when they don't need to, but we are trying to get them ready for electrification. And it may be that there's not a simple answer to that, and there's not a good way to do it, but I can look into it, so.
Yeah, the SPAN smart panels are about twice the cost of a regular panel, but they enable you to turn off your dryer when you want to use your induction stove, or vice versa. And kind of there's an awareness piece of that as well, with bringing your own containers to your restaurant. People may not be aware of that, it's unable to do that in California. People are bringing their bag to the grocery store, they don't know that's from the last 10 plus years of the reusable bag stuff, but how many years that's been. But bringing your own container to the restaurant is like a new thing, turning off your dryer when you want to use your stove, or whatever it is, like those alternating uses of electricity can be smart instead of having more service upgrades.
Another option for trying to overcome that barrier has been achieved by MCE with their water heater loaner program. They offer, you have your water heater has catastrophic failure, you need to get one right away. They have a program to loan I think it's a 110 heat pump water heater until you can get the wiring done, get your heat pump. Certainly Ava could run a program like that. I think it would take someone like Aaron Tiedman maybe suggesting it as Albany's representative to the board.
That, I think, is a great idea. Something I've heard about, and I'm a big fan of these loaner programs, but I think Albany trying to do something at our scale would be really, really challenging. But at a regional scale, I think it would be really promising. So, yeah, I think if you want to talk to your appointing council member about it, that might be a good idea. And then last question for you all. If there is interest in creating a subcommittee about this, maybe this would be the moment to make a motion for it. If not, that's also fine.
And what would the goal or desired outcome be?
So I think the goal of the subcommittee would be to decide on whether and what updates to make to the rebate program.
And could that be done also at the point closer to when the funding runs out, or is it important to do that now, or in terms of timing?
Yeah, I think if, based on the feedback that I've gotten tonight, it seems like there is interest in some changes to the program. So it seems like, there's some interest in making things happen now. If there's no interest in having a subcommittee, then basically I'll work on that on my own and bring that back to the committee when I have time. It might happen a little faster if there's a subcommittee, but, and if the subcommittee could also decide, like, we don't want to make any changes till the funding runs out and kind of bring that back. But if you don't make a subcommittee tonight, then basically I'll just work on it by myself in the meantime. Try to figure out what makes sense based on your comments.
I like the idea of Ava having a program more broadly that takes less work from Michelle, but also gets everyone's needs met in some ways. Because it's a more broad, applicable, and benefits everybody to have a water heater. Like, it's a great solution for a housing problem. Okay, contact Erin.
I feel like there was general agreement on a lot of the feedback here. So there's some directional idea, and I'm wondering if it might make sense or be possible to kind of put it on pause for a couple months while we learn any federal or state changes.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. If the committee in general feels like there's some things we'd kind of like to see change, but there's no rush and we'd rather wait a while, then we can definitely do that. That's totally an option. I was just basing it on the kind of changes that you guys were commenting on before, but that's another thing that you can recommend now, is to just pause it for a moment. I think, the danger there would be that, there's this kind of window of time where there's a lot of money available for heat pumps, and if we feel like our program isn't doing that much and we kind of want to shift it to be more effective in this period, then we kind of miss that window maybe. But if you feel like it's effective enough and it's doing its job and there's not that big of a change you'd like to see right now necessarily, then keeping it as it is for the time being isn't a problem.
I'll leave it in your hands.
That's a good point, though. Like, are you feeling like, in terms of your projected work, that it would be efficacious to have people to work with sooner rather than later?
Some of these questions are like very opinion-based questions, which starts to get out of my realm and into yours, where it's like, we could kind of go in a direction here, like, what do we think is best, So there's some stuff like that. That's things I can come back to the whole committee for. But there is some value in kind of having people to talk to that are sort of more in that, like, political opinion space and can say, like, this is what I think we should do. But like I said, it's not critical. And if it seems like there's sort of a feeling here that we don't need to make a change right now, then that's fine. We can just keep rolling. I will say we do need to extend the meeting before we keep rolling.
Didn't notice that. I move we extend. We're so close to done, to 9:10.
Second.
Member Bierce?
Yes.
Member Soon? Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Lieberman?
Yes.
Member Melgen?
Yes.
Chair Hill McClanahan?
Yes.
I'm getting the sense that there's not much interest in a subcommittee. So I'll just note that, which is okay, as I said.
Yeah, I'm getting that sense too. But I guess I would ask if, from your perspective, if it starts to become a thing where it's like, we should have our plans lined up, I need some feedback, will you bring it back?
Yeah, I can definitely do that. I can do a bit of work on this, maybe not in a huge rush. And if I feel like I get to a point where I'm like, I really need a subcommittee on this, if we're gonna make a change, I can bring that back to you all. And I can kind of look into the things you said, but also, you know, not try to turn things around necessarily immediately.
It's important, but not urgent, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like we landed somewhere. Yeah, sounds good.
Great. Okay, I heard that we do not have a subcommittee update, or do you want to say something? All right, then we're on to future agenda items. Let's start with requests from the public and then move to the committee.
Nick Peterson, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So again, just wanting to see the CAC move forward with some good ideas on, policy. So the discussions that you were just having regarding, the heat pump incentives and electrification in general. What's interesting is when we originally started looking at it, sort of maybe a point of sale requirement, there was a real estate agent that I don't remember, she came and spoke to the CAC, but was pretty committed that the only way to make a mandate work is make it something that's useful and has to be done, and then it'll just happen. And one thing that she was plugging was that you would have a point of sale mandate, just like you can't have a leaking sewer lateral, you have to do the sewer lateral. And usually the agents work out whether the buyer or the seller pays for it. But it has to happen when there's a transfer of ownership. So that just happens, and everybody knows it happens, and it just happens. And this particular agent was recommending that they make a panel upgrade to 200 amps just mandatory. And I was always of the opinion that, well, you can do some things on 100, and, it really is kind of a sledgehammer approach to a more nuanced problem, and there are new technology coming out. But the more I think about it, the more, now that I have my home more fully electrified, especially the charging of electric vehicles, which of course happens sometimes at night, but sometimes it's better to do it during the day, especially if you have solar panels. But the off-peak hours now go from midnight all the way to like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So you can do charging when there's solar generation happening. But anyway, the use of electric vehicles really jumps the amount of electricity you use. And having a 100-amp panel is just really kind of meager once you start thinking of having heat pump heating, heat pump water heater, electric dryer, electric induction cooktop, electric spas, electric other things. So the use of electricity is bound to be sort of increasing. So I think that would be a good thing to maybe study again, is having a really simple, when a home sells, does it have 200 amp service? If it doesn't, you have to put it in. And that's just a mandate at point of sale. So I don't know if anyone's interested in doing that, but I think that would be pretty useful. Thanks.
No other hands raised.
All right, any future agenda items from the committee?
I've got a couple, as always. One on private property tree ordinances. Cities like Berkeley, Oakland, Hayward, San Carlos, Palo Alto, East Palo Alto all have ordinances about protecting large old trees that are carbon sinks, provide shade that reduces rated for AC, make sidewalks more comfortable in hot weather. And we don't have a similar version of this in Albany. And we cover street trees, we cover urban forest, but we don't include private property, which might seem challenging given the small lots we have, but if St. Carlos can do it, we can do it, I think. And I have some research on that I'm happy to share. And then the other item I want to mention is a kind of comprehensive approach to like planning around climate. So there's a stormwater plan, the climate action plan, sidewalk rehabilitation plan, and the street tree plan, how do we think about doing that all kind of together and being comprehensive around if we remove hardscape, add native species, and do this comprehensively, we can reduce stormwater runoff to the bay, we can get more pollinator habitat, we could have more shade, a lot of benefits to thinking about comprehensively across different departments, and not just only one thing at a time. So 2 items.
That reminds me of something that I'm interested in as well, similar to that. I'm wondering if it might be possible to have whomever is working on the new stormwater plan come and speak. That has a lot of climate implications. And I would also be kind of dovetailing with that, be interested in talking about sort of, but this is quite abstract, opportunities for connected to that, like several plans all touch on climate, connected also to what the commenter Lucinda was saying near the beginning of some staff still not having gotten the memo about the climate emergency. I would be interested in exploring ideas for bringing city staff together and working on climate across all functions.
So the one thing I was thinking about was that, I forget what it's called, the work, what, every 2 years we do the work package?
Work plan?
Work plan, there we go. Maybe like in beginning of the year, we should have some update on that, where we're at, especially with new members coming in.
Yeah, the council has shifted exactly what that looks like a bit, so now it's more of a staff-driven status update model, but we can still build in time to do kind of more informal work planning within the committee, just for clarification.
All right, that's all the requested future agenda items. So that concludes our meeting.
And I'll just add, we do have our next meeting scheduled for December 18th as of now, but that may be rescheduled or canceled depending on who's available. And when we formally close, I'll chat with you about availability.
That's good. Thank you. All right, this meeting is adjourned.